Well, Craig, it's great to see you again, brother. And I've been looking forward to this conversation, this series in general, but your participation in it, called The Future is Calling Us to Greatness. Welcome.
Thank you, Michael. It's great to be here. Good to see you again.
Yeah. So I'm noticing that we've got a little bandwidth issue. So when you're speaking, I'll probably shut my video off just to save bandwidth. And then when I ask a question or whatever, I'll come back on. We'll see what that does. Just a little background. So I've been interviewing now. It'll be a total of 50. I've interviewed 42 so far. Really amazing leaders regarding peak oil, climate change, sustainability, and a variety of spiritual leaders in terms of how to hold some of this scary stuff in ways that inspire us to work together and to be in action and to really be a blessing to future generations. So this theme, the future is calling us to greatness, is sort of the unifying theme. And what I've been doing at the start is just asking all my guests to introduce themselves. I don't want to assume that everybody that's viewing this or watching this will be familiar with you and your work, even though we've been friends for a decade and I deeply value your work. Some people won't be. So don't be bashful. Help us get who Craig Hamilton is and what you're most proud of, and then also in terms of how did you get to this place? So a little bit of your journey. Feel free to take 5, 7, 8 minutes, but help us get who you are and your work in the world.
Well, the work I'm doing right now in the world is really the culmination of a lifelong spiritual journey. I was born and raised in a kind of agnostic Unitarian family. We didn't have any, God was not really a topic of conversation at our dinner table,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't really have any particular spiritual or religious worldview shoved down my throat growing up. It was left pretty wide open for me to find out. And
Mm-hmm.
in my teenage years, uh, I started to feel a calling. I guess I would say a spiritual calling. I just started to get a sense that there was something deeper going on here than met the eye, and that I was learning about in school from my parents. There was a deeper layer to all this, and a series of mystical experiences that started to happen for me.
Mm.
Probably when I was about 14, I would say would really be the first time I would say I started to have kind of breakthroughs to the other side, where I would begin to sense a kind of a deep awe and reverence for a kind of profound mystery that
Mm-hmm.
that would come over me, and a sense of that this cosmos wasn't just dead inert matter, but there was an inherent kind of care, presence, and intelligence in the fabric of reality itself in some way. And I began to follow that calling. I began to respond to those experiences by studying and learning more about spirituality. I, studied, like a lot of us, I studied a lot of the Eastern stuff because that seemed to
Uh-huh.
be a little more alive with the mystical. The Enlightenment dimension was a little more visible at that point through the Eastern teachings, even though now a lot of the mystical teachings of the West have come to the forefront as well.
Sure.
But yeah, I became a spiritual seeker. I tried a lot of Eastern things. I learned to meditate, began meditating intently in my early 20s,
Mm-hmm.
traveled to the East, did my pilgrimage to Asia when I got out of college, and was just, yeah, very much really starting to organize my life around my spiritual quest. And but I would say it all, what really the shift that has led to where I am now and the work I'm doing now really began when I met my spiritual teacher, who was a Westerner named Andrew Cohen,
Mm-hmm.
and had an organization called Enlighten Next. And we published a magazine called What is Enlightenment? I met him, and in that encounter had just a I would say my spiritual experience just broke through to a much deeper level.
Yeah.
And instead of just having high, kind of what we might call, you know, high mystical state experiences, I began to have these experiences of what's known as non-duality, or
Mm-hmm.
satori, or enlightenment, where suddenly everything I had been reading about all these years, in all these spiritual books, was suddenly becoming visible to me in my own experience, and I was starting to understand it from the inside instead of from the outside.
Yeah.
And And so I got very interested in what he was teaching. I got deeply involved in a community, and we lived together in what I would only call a laboratory of evolution,
Mm-hmm. That's a
which
good.
I
Yeah.
participated in for 13 years.
Mm-hmm.
And we were really attempting to live a holy life, live a spiritual life, but in a modern, postmodern, contemporary context.
Yeah.
And so, in other words, we weren't attempting to replicate the traditional model, even though many elements of what you might call the traditional guru model or guru system were in play there. But but we were really trying to find out, what does enlightenment mean
Mm-hmm.
now in our lives, and to to the topic of your series here, what does it have to do with evolution? What does it
Yes.
have to do with the future? What's the relationship between the timeless, transcendent dimension of being and
Mm-hmm.
this miraculous process of becoming that we find ourselves in? And so that really was the focal point for that chapter in my journey. I left there about 9 years ago this month, actually.
Wow.
Yeah, October, 9 years ago this month. I felt I had come to the end of my participation in that experiment, and it was time to go move on and find out what was next. And, in a sense, the inkling was that there was a way to bring a lot of the insights we were having in our laboratory out to life outside the petri dish, in a sense, to people who were living, because we were a spiritual community, and when
Sure.
in spiritual community so much is facilitated and made easy. You've got a context for doing intensive spiritual practice. You can do communal meals, make everything communal, which takes a lot of the burden of life management off of your plate, because you're
Sure.
sharing it with so many people. So it creates a kind of little utopian environment that's hard to replicate when you have a full-time job
Yeah.
and
Sure.
family and whatever. So I really felt that I had a job to do, which was to translate the learnings from our evolutionary laboratory to life in the modern world, and wasn't sure how I was going to do it. And then about five years ago in October, I started offering a series of online courses
Mm-hmm.
teaching how to live what I call an evolutionary relationship to life.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't sure how many people would be interested in this. It was an experiment for me, but really straight out of the gate, when I started offering these programs, the interest just took off like wildfire. And,
Yeah.
and the first program filled up in one day. The second program filled up in a few days. Then I expanded the offering, and pretty soon it was going from 300 people in the course to 800 people in the course to 1,200 people in the course, and I was running graduate offerings for the people who had taken the 9 week introductory course, and this just kind of it kind of took over my life. Frankly, I wasn't really expecting any of it at first. I thought I would just be offering a little online course, and maybe I'd have an assistant helping me out, and it would be very small scale, and suddenly I found myself having to build a rather large organization to support the work I was doing. And
Uh-huh.
so I ended up being an organizational leader, sort of a reluctant organizational leader along the way.
Uh-huh.
And the organization we built to do online education, not just for myself, but offerings for other teachers, and including a program we did with you at one point.
Yep.
Um, grew really fast. We reached number 83 on the Inc. 500 2 years ago, which is the list of America's fastest growing companies. So I've been through quite a journey the last 5 years, both in terms of really feeling the expansion of my teaching
Yes.
work, also learning what it is to hold a large organization, and be an entrepreneur, and a
Yes.
a
Right.
spiritual entrepreneur, a social entrepreneur, in a sense. So where I am now is I have a large graduate community of people who've been committed to the teaching work, which I call integral enlightenment.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got, yeah, so I have students who've been with me for up to 5 years, intensely involved in this work, and who are themselves taking a lot of leadership now in sharing it with others, and I'm continuing to offer online courses in both meditation, but particularly in this evolutionary piece, and how to not just have spiritual practice be something we do for an hour a day or half an hour a day when we sit down to do our contemplative work, but how to make our whole life into a spiritual practice.
Yeah,
How to
amen.
have every minute be a form of practice, meaning a way of becoming more conscious, of more awake, less of a conditioned automaton, etc.
Yeah, amen.
So,
Amen. Well, I
so
mean, that's one of the things that I've appreciated about you and your work ever since I met you. I mean, you actually first introduced me to Andrew Cohen and his community, and you know, Carter Phipps and so many other people I count as dear friends and colleagues now. And it's precisely your blend, your integration of both a traditional form of spiritual practice and a deeply ecological, deeply evolutionary understanding of our inner and outer nature that you know, both drew me to you as a person, but also to seeing you as a close colleague in this what Thomas Berry called the great work of
mhm.
humanity, coming into a mutually enhancing relationship with the larger body of life upon which we depend and of which we're a part. We're an expression of that. Say a little bit, if you will, about your wife and mission
Yeah,
partner,
yeah.
Claire.
Oh, well, so yeah, she plays a role in that story too. So she was the one who really prompted me to go and offer my online course 5 years ago. She is a real evolutionary leader herself. She's the head founder and leader of a global spiritual community of her own called the Feminine Power Global Community. She teaches a series of
Mm-hmm.
online courses for women. She's had 10,000 women graduate from her 7-week course and trained hundreds of coaches. And she's got an enormous body of work that is, you know, parallel to mine. It's different than what I teach, but we influence each other a lot. So
Sure.
we've both learned a lot from each other, and she's an incredible human being. I met her about 8 years ago, 8.5 years ago, I guess, and we got married a year later, and have had an incredible life together as evolutionary partners. It's funny, we often when we reflect back to when we first met, there was all kinds of sparks were flying,
Uh huh.
but only some of them were sexual romantic sparks.
Exactly.
We would both say the majority of the sparks that flew were were like about our shared mission. There
Yes.
was really a sense that we were life partners, mission partners. I know you have described, you know, that similar feeling when you met Connie, that
Yes.
you knew you
Exactly.
were together for a mission. So yeah, Claire's she's been very instrumental because she was doing the online education, transformational education before I was, and she's the one who I think saw that I had a piece to offer there and kind of shoved me off the cliff into the free fall I've been on the last 5 years.
Amen.
So
Thank God for partners that'll do that.
absolutely.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I just so appreciate about both you and Claire is that you have. It seems to me that you have, and of course, when we've stayed with you, we've talked a little bit about this. Something very similar. Connie and I are primarily mission partners. Yes, we fell in love. Yes, we've been married. Yes, we've been together 13 and a half years. Yes, we love each other and have a really yummy relationship. And still to this day, it's our shared sense of life purpose, our mission, you know, where we can contribute to a healthy future, what we're here on the planet to do, like given our unique gifts and limitations, the synergy of us working together and not having identically the same mission. She has her ministry that she's doing with assisted migration and trees, and I have my ministry working to transform sort of traditional religion along ecological evolutionary lines, and yet we synergize with each other so powerfully that I wish for everyone the kind of mission partnership that we have and that the two of you have.
Mm. Yeah, it's a wonderful thing. Oh, by the way, and if anyone's curious, her last name's different than mine. It's Zamet. So Claire Zamet, if anybody was like, oh,
Yes,
who's that?
yes,
Look
exactly.
her up.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, Craig, say a little bit about some of these memes, these concepts that we've both been associated with. Obviously, evolutionary spirituality is a meme that we've both found value in and have used at times. So say a little bit about sort of your take on evolutionary spirituality, as well as the name of your organization, Evolving Wisdom.
Mm. Okay, well, I'll take them separately because I mean different things by them. But so evolutionary spirituality is a very, it's an increasingly kind of big tent term. Funny enough,
Yes.
excitingly enough, I guess we
Mm-hmm.
could say it's become something that's really can hold a lot of different perspectives. I was recently got to spend some time with a mutual friend and colleague of ours, Steve
Uh
McIntosh,
huh.
and Carter Phipps, who
Yeah.
you also mentioned, who wrote the book Evolutionaries, and Steve wrote Evolution's Purpose and
Yeah.
Integral Consciousness, and we were hanging out together for a few days here in California, and just talking about this movement and saying, well, wow, it's not a religion, it's but it's certainly brought together a lot of people, and there's a lot of diversity under it. I mean, there are
Absolutely.
people whose version of evolutionary spirituality, quite, from one point of view, you could almost say it's a form of secular spirituality,
Uh
meaning
huh.
it's really fundamentally science based. It doesn't really uh, take there to be any of the things that sort of traditional religion and spirituality were pointing to, like a transcendent dimension
Mm-hmm.
or something known as spirit that's conscious and intelligent, and not something that's just part of matter. It's there are people who would hold that side of it,
Mm-hmm.
all the way on the other end, probably folks like myself who you would say are kind of radical mystics in a traditional sense, but we're holding a mystical evolutionary worldview where we're
Mm-hmm.
really, in a sense, talking about what it means to incarnate and embody the impulse of evolution, which could be seen as another word for spirit,
Mm-hmm.
as oneself.
Yeah.
And so here we have this big wide field, and I'm excited to have so much under it. Of course, when you have so many different versions of something, everybody kind of is a little worried about the other versions because they think, well, I don't want people to think evolutionary spirituality is just about that, because to me it's about this. I always notice those tensions when I talk to people who are kind of holding different places on that spectrum. But fundamentally, I think from just the health of it, what's great about it is that I think what we all share in a sense is that we're all seeking to find a way to resurrect the inherent innate value of a spiritual worldview and a spiritual orientation to life on the other side of modernism,
Yeah.
on the other side of modernism and postmodernism, which both played a role in kind of taking the spirit out of spirituality. So, like in other words, so to get to your question about how I hold evolutionary spirituality, I mean, the part of it that I'm particularly excited about is it's really bringing down to earth a form of spirituality where we are that's 100% life positive and world embracing,
Beautiful.
because a lot of, again, not all, but broadly speaking, all of the religious, mystical, spiritual traditions arose at a time when the fundamental worldview was either kind of static, like there's nothing new under the sun, this is the way it's always been since it was created in some moment, and
Yep.
then it's
Yep.
just been this way and it'll always be this way. Or there was a belief that it was cyclical, things
Yep.
just kind of went around in circles. And and so in that world, and then you start discovering these higher spiritual potentials, which are so elevating, the
Mm-hmm.
emergence of our higher nature.
Mm-hmm.
And we start to say, oh, well, this must be the way out of this suffering, horrible world, the way out of this cycle that just
Mm-hmm.
goes round and round, or the way off of this flat, static world that's, you know, basically so full of pain and suffering. And so spirituality naturally, I think, got conceived as the escape
Yeah.
from this world in some way. And now here we are on the the other side of the modernist revolution, the scientific revolution, and we have so many ways of really beginning to understand and see what's going on here, really, not
Uh-huh.
just making stuff up, but we're starting to understand where we came from, understand this cosmos, understand our own true origin story
Mm-hmm.
to the degree that we can, and we say, oh, it's not just going around in circles, and it's not just standing still, it's moving. It's
Yes.
a process. It's an evolutionary process that started 13.8, 13.7. People are using different numbers these days. So anyway, 13.8 billion years ago, this thing burst into motion. It's been unfolding ever since. There was the Big Bang of the universe, the Big Bang of life, when
Yes.
life burst out of this. Then there was the Big Bang of the human mind, and
Uh-huh.
hopefully other similar minds and other planets perhaps, but at least here
Yes.
we had the big bang of a human consciousness come onto the scene, and it's just been one evolutionary dynamic after another getting unleashed, and now we look around at this amazing world that we've created in a very brief period of time in human history, and you realize, wow, this is all part of this evolutionary unfolding. And if that's the case, that what the universe is a process of evolution. It's not
Yes.
even a thing that's evolving, it's evolution
Yes.
itself. That's probably the best way to describe it. Then that means I'm a process of evolution, and humanity is a process of evolution. And what does it mean for me as a human being to let go of my all of to come back to the spiritual conversation? Then it's about, oh, I want to go beyond. I want to let go of all of my false beliefs and assumptions about who and what I am, and discover my true nature, which in the way I'm speaking about it now, I'm not just speaking about your true nature as a transcendent being,
Mm-hmm.
infinite, beyond
Yes.
time and change. I'm talking about your true nature as the evolutionary impulse itself in motion. And what happens when we start to realize we're a process, that we're evolving, that we have the energy of the Big Bang alive inside us, and that we now can become conscious agents of the evolutionary process and contribute to where this and begin to guide where this whole thing goes. What
Yeah.
a what an extraordinary life to be living, that we're at at a time when we can actually recognize all that and begin to embrace that, and then in my case, build a spiritual practice
Mm-hmm.
around those insights that is fundamentally transformative, still to helping us evolve beyond ego, but for an evolutionary reason, for a reason much bigger than ourselves. Not just because I want to get out of my personal suffering, but because I want to help contribute
Yes.
to laying down the pathway for future humanity to follow, to really living in a much different way, living in a way that embodies all of these emergent virtues and potentials that have been bubbling up in
Mm-hmm.
human consciousness for several thousand years. But now now there's this invitation
Yeah.
to own and claim and step into that
Yeah.
fully.
Yeah, amen. Well, that was great, and one of the things that it just toward the end you were leaning into where I was hoping that you would go, because one of the reasons why I particularly wanted a variety of spiritual leaders to be part of this series is because so oftentimes the critique from the secular world is that spiritual and religious people are all self-focused. It's all about me and my enlightenment, my
Hmm.
salvation, my wholeness, my healing,
Hmm.
and I think that does a tremendous disservice to in my experience, the vast majority of religious and spiritual people, because it's not just
Hmm.
about perfecting the individual, but it's about empowering the individual to not be encumbered by some of the things that traditionally have limited us, so that we can truly be a greater blessing, of greater service, so that we can be evolution incarnate in a divine way, helping to ensure a healthy future for all of us. So anything that you'd like to say in terms of how you see
Yeah.
spirituality in that process?
Well, you've been making a very interesting point there, and when you say that's the critique from the secular world of of a lot of spiritual people, it's fascinating because see, that's probably really a critique of what's going on in kind of contemporary, progressive, postmodern spirituality, which really has become quite self-focused.
Hmm.
See, and it actually, it's kind of, you're pointing to the very thing I meant when I said, resurrecting spirit on the other side of postmodernity, which I didn't speak much about. I was really speaking there about more how we
Sure.
discover a spirituality that can embrace modernism, embrace the insights of science, but then on the other side of postmodernity, what does it mean to rediscover the sacred?
Yes.
And postmodernity is where we sort of dismantled every meta narrative, every larger meaning story, and
Hmm.
said, "Oh, there's no true story. There's just your story." And my story, and whatever story we make, that's the story. And don't tell me, don't shove any truth on me, man. There is no truth. There's just perspective. There's just my take and your take. And that's of course been a liberating insight for human beings to realize, oh, well, we do all make our own meaning out of things. We
Yep.
we do all see through distorted lenses. Let's not
Yep.
pretend, that we're just because I'm seeing it, it's true. So that's
Yep.
been an evolutionary move. But you can. The other part of that is, as some have pointed out, is it's led to just a in a sense, well, what's left then is just the individual and their story. And then what's left of spirituality when you dismantle all the superstructures, if you will? What's left of spirituality is just, well, me and my quest for self-fulfillment, me and my quest to have a happy life. And if you look at a lot of what's kind of being touted, like look at some of the spiritual magazines that are out there, about that are mostly kind of centered around the yoga world. um, what's the story they're telling? It's about you
Yes. Right.
and your practice, your happiness,
Yeah.
your liberation, and everybody's talking about me and my self-expression. And there is a way, on the one hand, again, that's an individuating movement in human consciousness, but from another point of view, it's kind of like yuck,
Yes. Exactly.
ooh. And I
Exactly.
think that's the critique you're pointing to, because we all sense, well, hey, it's not about you. Don't you know
Yeah.
that? Even not even just from a spiritual or religious point of view, but just from a kind of humanistic point of
Yes.
view,
Right.
like you're
Right.
saying, secular humanists would just be like, well, come on, we're all in this together. It's about society. It's about the underprivileged, and it's about elevating this whole human project. And so I think it's a true critique. It's a fascinating critique. And again, I feel that this is where this evolutionary insight and this embrace of a truly evolutionary worldview
Hmm.
uh, can help lift spirituality out of the kind of narcissism that it's a bit mired
Yes.
in the contemporary kind of spiritual scene, and where we start to realize, oh, actually, I'm I'm evolving my consciousness, not just so I can have a better life. I want to help evolve human consciousness. Because let's face it here,
And the paradox is that's where
yeah,
we find a better life.
absolutely. Well, that's what's going to make you happy, by the way, but don't seek that because it'll ruin the
Exactly.
whole thing. But, and I know this is something you've thought a lot about from the evolutionary psychology point of view too, but, like, really what we're up against as human beings in terms of finding the creativity and the will
Hmm.
and the care to solve the many problems that we've created,
Hmm.
as human beings. In many ways, we're up against our own unevolved human nature. We're up
Hmm.
against our own instinctual nature to be self-interested, to be short-term thinking, just out for me and what I'm going to get in the short term, and all the fear-driven kind of, and kind of tribalism and ethnocentrism. Like there's all this unevolved kind of some of it's just animal instincts, some of it's, deeply, socially and culture, social instincts, et cetera, things that have developed as we've been humans.
Hmm.
Some of it came from our early animal past. what if those of us with the eyes to see and the ears to hear took on the project of evolving human nature? Because human nature isn't given. It didn't, you know, they used to think that in the religions, right?
Yeah,
You had your good side and your bad side, but it's like, no, human nature evolved over time in response to certain life conditions.
exactly.
It's still evolving. We can evolve it consciously. Doesn't mean we can necessarily root out the deep biological drives, and but we can become conscious of them
Yes.
in such a way that we gain freedom from them,
Yep.
and we can now make healthy, constructive, positive, life-giving evolutionary choices in the face of everything, no matter how powerful our instinctual drives are trying to throw us off course, when there's sufficient consciousness, which is what the spiritual path has always been about. It's
Yeah.
always been about expanding our consciousness, deepening ourself,
Mm-hmm.
meaning our interiority, to a
Mm-hmm.
place where we have freedom in the face of all of our conditioned, programmed, instinctual drives, so we can make free, highly evolved, creative choices that are in line with something else. I would say that something else is this evolutionary impulse I'm talking about, which is none other than spirit, which is something we can tune into. But whether we accept that or not, we might say, well, I don't know about that part. But certainly we could all say, wow, human nature needs to evolve. We're still very primitive beasts.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we're making really bad choices now, individually and collectively, that could have implications for tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years more. So yeah, so that's
Yeah.
where, to me, we potentially find the sacred and spirit again in a new incarnation in an evolutionary context that really takes us beyond the self-centeredness that is so prevalent,
Yeah.
and
Amen,
kind of,
brother.
yeah.
Well, one of the things that the way that I've begun languaging it that I find works in Western religious circles, Eastern religious circles, and secular circles is to talk about right relationship to reality. And by my reality, I mean what's real, whether we believe it or not. And those what's true and inescapably, fundamentally, undeniably real. And I think there are three things that, at least as I see it, are real, whether we believe in them or not. Time is real. The past is real. The present clearly is real. And if we act as if the future is not real, we'll condemn the future. So, in some very real sense, time is real regardless of our beliefs. Nature is real. Our inner nature, our outer nature, our social nature, and our interpretive nature. So, nature is real. But mystery is also real. And whether you think of mystery in transcendent terms or not, it's not just the realm that we don't know, it's the entire realm that we don't even know that we don't know and will never know. And there's many different ways of thinking about
Nice.
that, but I think to be in right relationship to reality, time, nature, and mystery, whatever else it means, it can't be less than living in right relationship, in a mutually enhancing relationship, in an honorable relationship with time, nature, and mystery. And this leads actually to that other phrase that I was asking you about, which is the name of your organization, or one of your organizations, Evolving Wisdom. Speak to that.
Hmm. Well, evolving wisdom is really, oh, well, gosh, I mean, I think I just want to acknowledge that what you just shared, because I mean, that's it itself is a wonderful contribution to think about, right relationship to reality. I mean, I just want to say I would agree with that, as fundamentally, if we would say, what's the goal of spiritual life? What is
Mm.
enlightenment for?
Mm-hmm.
It's to bring us into right relationship to reality.
Amen.
We might disagree about, whether or not we believe it to be. We might have disagreements about
Sure.
what the content of all of that is, and that's part of the human journey, is continuing to explore all those things. But fundamentally, I'm a big yes to that framing. And um, as for evolving wisdom, I mean, this is an organization that really grew. My teaching work is called Integral Enlightenment, and
Mm-hmm.
it's really it's a path of enlightenment that is about awakening us to both our true nature beyond time and change. So both the
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
transcendent dimension of who we are, but also the evolutionary dimension of
Yeah.
who we are, both of which are dimensions of spirit and the sacred. So that's that work,
Sure.
and then evolving wisdom was really an organization that grew out of that, because as I was building this online, what I call the Academy for Evolutionaries, I was building this online training academy
Yep.
to teach people all of this. I started to have other people, other teachers who were
Mm-hmm.
teaching different offerings, some of which were in line with that, others which were totally different than that,
Mm-hmm.
and some of which my wife was teaching on
Yeah.
different topics, and friends and come to me and say, well, gee, you're building this whole online university in a sense. Maybe I could teach a course under
Mm-hmm.
that umbrella, and we looked at how to do that. And so that's when Evolving Wisdom was born, was really as a meta organization. And I'm glad you like the name of it. I mean, naming anything is always a
Yeah. Right.
major creative project in itself. But when we came upon Evolving Wisdom as an idea, we said, wow, that really captures it, because it flies so the word wisdom in and of itself very often conjures up this kind of, we're trying to discover the unchanging, the
Mm.
timeless fundamental truths about reality, the deep wisdom traditions that
Right.
truths were discovered long ago and they'll never change. And yet clearly, as part of becoming an evolutionary and embracing an evolutionary worldview, we realize everything's evolving, and wisdom is definitely evolving. I mean,
Yes.
the
Yes.
wisdom, meaning the applied knowledge that we need to meet the challenges of today's world,
Yes.
and to meet the call of the future, as you're pointing to here, is so vastly
Yes.
different than the wisdom we needed to live in an agrarian society.
Yes.
So wisdom's evolving. Let's help it evolve by in this case, offering courses, trainings, programs
Mm-hmm.
to help people make those leaps and meet all the challenges of today.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And one of the things I love about it also is that, you come from this solid grounding in evolutionary spirituality, evolutionary enlightenment, and your wife has done such fabulous work in terms of women and bringing women's wisdom. And, most people know that in most cultures, wisdom has been personified as the feminine. So when different cultures
Mm,
have spoken of wisdom, they've often done so with a
mm,
she and that sort
hmm.
of thing. So. Well, Craig, what gives you hope? Like, you're obviously aware of some of these big challenges, both currently that we're beginning to deal with. I've often heard it said that we are the first generations to experience the sting of
Hmm.
climate change, and we're the
Hmm.
last generation to be able to do anything about it. Because what gets
Right.
done in the next 15 years or so will lock in space and time certain patterns, earth patterns that are from the human standpoint practically irreversible. So, what gives you hope? What inspires you to wake up on a day by day, week by week basis in the face of some pretty scary stuff? Climate change, peak oil, global, the growing gap between the rich and the poor, species extinction, on and on. How do you stay engaged in action, centered, without sort of numbing your heart, but in a way that allows that pain to motivate you to be of service?
Well, I don't know. Now that you named all those bad things that are happening, I just think I want to, crawl under my desk here and give up. No. No, Michael, it's an interesting thing. This question of hope and optimism and possibility that you bring up, because you know I'm sure you encounter this, and as a spiritual teacher who's interacting with thousands of people, I run into it constantly. There's often a kind of despair
Sure.
operating,
Yeah. Yeah.
and there's a sense of it's not possible. I don't know if we could get through it. The systems are
Right.
too powerful. The power interests are too entrenched.
Yeah.
The lack of political will, take it
Yeah.
all apart, and it can seem pretty daunting. And I mean, and there are people who are doing good work to try to pull the hope right out of the facts, like people who are focusing on the like Yes Magazine doing the
Right.
journal Positive Future, saying, "Hey, look at all the good things that are being done to address these issues. Let's bring our attention there," because there's an amazing amount that's
Yes.
being,
Exactly.
an incredible creativity at every level of this human system trying to tackle these challenges, and even though there are, a lot of entrenched structures that are in our way. But I so yeah, we can get a lot of hope just by studying, the good things that are happening.
Hmm.
But when I think about where do I really get my own sense of optimism and then hope, I guess, too, and where I would encourage people to look for that is really it's in the evolutionary worldview itself. It's
Yes.
in a deep time perspective
Yes.
itself, because it's sort of like, take anything that's happening right now, and it could be in your personal life, it could be in your community, it could be in the world as a whole.
Hmm.
Take anything that feels totally stuck. You know, Pick something, because any of us can find lots of them. I'm stuck in this way. I can't seem to change it. The planet's stuck. This gap between rich and poor. How are we ever gonna, So whatever it is, and now just pull back a little bit from it.
Hmm.
In other words, like back, like you're now looking at a longer time frame,
Yes.
and just realize that whatever that thing is that right now seems so stuck, so the way things are, it hasn't always been that way.
Right.
In fact, not that long ago, I'm sure it wasn't that way,
Yes.
whatever you chose. You
Yes.
don't have to look very far back to a time when, oh, it wasn't like that. It was the opposite. Maybe the opposite problem was happening.
Yes.
And then you go, oh, so now the pendulum swung in an attempt to solve that problem. Now it's gone way over here, and that's really bad. But, now just allow yourself to extend out. How far do you have to let your imagination stretch out into the future to see a time when it's not happening anymore?
Yeah.
It's going to change.
Yes.
If there's anything we learn from looking at this 13.8 billion year journey we've
Yeah.
been on, is that everything always changes.
And chaos
And
keeps driving creativity. I mean, one of the things that
yeah,
I find hope in
right.
is pointing out how invaluable, how absolutely necessary chaos, breakdown, destruction. I mean, these are the primary drivers of creativity and transformation for not just thousands or tens of thousands, but even millions of years.
Absolutely. You know, j- positive change never happens because it's a good idea. I mean,
Yeah,
rarely,
yeah, right, right,
once in a while,
right.
but it almost always happens because it has to.
Yes, exactly.
Because, as you said, the life conditions, the chaos, whatever, the breakdowns force us to come up with a creative solution. So that's another part of it.
Yeah.
And so that's maybe 2 points, because I'm saying just the fact that evolution is going on, change is happening, means nothing is stuck, really.
Mm,
Everything is going to change to something, and then the question becomes, oh, if it's going to change, if this thing that I hate about the world right now isn't really going to be this way forever, then what's it going to change into? And how am I going to help it change into
yeah,
that?
amen.
And
Amen.
then you just become an agent of the change process, helping take it in the most positive direction possible. And then, you don't even, it's almost like we don't have the luxury to be pessimists.
Yeah,
We
right.
don't have time to be pessimistic.
Yeah.
We just have to be engaged. We just have to be
Yes.
moving. We just have to be, being part of the solution. And then, are some bad things gonna happen? Maybe.
Hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
they are
Yeah.
happening now for
Exactly.
sure. And might certain things, go too far or have really tragic consequences? Sure, I'm not naive. Maybe
Right.
they will. But there's a I think when you start to tap into this evolutionary impulse in yourself, and you start to see it active in other people, and you
Yeah.
see it operating in society as a whole, and there's a certain fundamental faith in
Yes.
that starts to form, where I guess you just get more inspired to play a bigger game.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
realize, and this is an important one, because a lot of us, kind of go, wow, what impact could I have? I'm just one person, this big world, all these structures, power interests, what impact could I have? But, you know, very, the reality is very often it's one individual with a big idea that ends up having the big impact, or
Yes.
certainly a group who mobilize around something. And so we don't get to have the excuse that I'm too small to make a big difference. The other thing I want to say about that, though, is doing big things
Hmm.
is generally much easier than doing small things.
Oh, say more about that.
Well, so you think about, let's say let's say I'm in this, like, I want to do something about climate change, but I'm just little old me.
Uh huh.
So what could I really do? Not much. So maybe I'll do like a little thing, like I want to, try to get, a few people on my block to recycle more. And, I kind of have a really small project I want to try to do.
Uh-huh.
And then you run around and tell everybody about your small project. How excited do they get? Not that excited because they kind of know, well, that's not a very big idea. It's not going to have that much. Yeah, sure, I'll help your project. But come up with a really big idea
Yeah.
that has big sights and big potential and is a really inspired vision that's not embedded in your own beliefs of limitation, but it's embedded in your sense of possibility.
Mm-hmm.
And now go around and start telling people about it
Amen.
from a place of confidence. And you notice, what do? They go, wow, it's a big,
Yeah.
tell me more. Wow, how could I help you? I've
Yeah.
got some this, and I have a friend who that, and, I know the head of this organ board and da da da. And, suddenly resources are gathering and mobilizing around that person who's kind of has an unstoppable vision and is taking on something that maybe is bigger than anybody really thinks is totally possible, but they're still much more interested in betting on that and hitching themselves to that than that little thing that obviously. So the deeper point here is that when we choose when we when we take on
Mm-hmm.
a project that is bigger than we think we could really realistically accomplish, but we
Uh-huh.
go ahead and we set our sights on something big and
Mm-hmm.
we stretch toward it, it brings a lot more out of us
Yep.
personally.
Yep.
So it brings things out of me that I didn't know were in there,
Yep.
and it also draws other people in at a much higher level of interest and engagement
Yes,
than
exactly.
anything small. And so, and some would even say forces of the universe conspire to support that. I don't know if I believe that or not. Sometimes it sure feels that
Yes,
way.
exactly.
But whether
Exactly.
or not we believe that,
Yes.
just scientifically speaking, socially speaking, and that's why I think big ideas get traction, and we need big ideas and we need big visions and big projects. And
Yes.
and so I think I'm just saying this to kind of encourage anybody who's like feeling like, oh, I want to make a difference, but how? I'm saying, well, pick something big.
Yes, exactly.
Don't do
Amen.
something too small because it probably won't happen.
Amen.
But big
Amen.
things happen.
Yes. Exactly.
So,
Oh, Craig, this is so great. Let's see if let me look at my notes here. So there's a question that Connie's been inviting me to ask all my guests, and it's been really fun because I purposely don't let folk know ahead of time. And that is, if you had the opportunity to have dinner, like a dinner party where any three people in human history, and you and Claire, or a one-on-one where you go for a hike together or over a glass of wine or a cup of coffee or whatever. If you had the opportunity to be with any three people in history in a really relaxed, warm, comfortable setting where you could understand each other, like universal translation, so they don't all have to speak English.
yeah.
Who would those three people be, and why would you choose them?
Wow, that's so interesting. Okay, I only get three. I get
Yes,
that.
exactly. And I know you'll wake up tomorrow morning probably with somebody else in
A
mind, but
different
that's
list.
okay.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's good. It's a fun thought experiment. Well, let's see here. I mean, the first two that jumped immediately to mind
Yep.
were I would want to have it be the Jesuit priest and paleontologist Pierre Teilhard de Chardin,
Yes, yes,
who is one of
beautiful.
the sort of progenitors of this whole
Mm-hmm.
evolutionary spirituality movement.
Yep.
The other one that was right there with him was Sri Aurobindo,
Oh,
who
yeah.
was really the other kind of core genesis driver of the evolutionary spirituality movement, I would say. And so
Mm-hmm.
those two
Yep.
were just boom.
Yep.
And then I was sort of like, okay, who's the third? Who's the third? And you know, hmm, hmm, Jesus or the Buddha? I
Yeah.
don't know.
Right, 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 right.
Which one?
Right.
Um, oh, interesting.
That's
Yeah,
that's okay. Well,
I bet I bet I'd get. You know what? I bet I'd pick Jesus just so I could find out what he really thought, because the Buddha's less controversial. um,
yeah. No.
Gosh, yeah, but I know those are all men, and I was trying to think, well, that's how typical, right? I'm a male leader. I want to talk to all these men. I think it's probably an unfortunate piece of just, reality of our history that when we look back, the most visible,
Sure.
impactful figures are men. I think if we were asking that question 1,000 years from now,
Right. Right.
I'd probably be saying people, like some of the leaders who are emerging now, the powerful
Yes.
women who are
Yep.
alive today. So
Yeah. Yeah. No,
anyway,
exactly.
and you said why? Well, I think the deeper why is because, I guess I'd want to, particularly for Teilhard and Aurobindo, really sense into the heart of the impulse that they were experiencing that was, it for them, so original and new and fresh and
Yep.
revolutionary in the face of everything that everything they had come out of
Yep.
was so traditional, and yet there was this bursting forth of a new meme, really a new
Yeah.
possibility, and so it would just be to sense into them as human beings and what their experience is of this coming online. I don't know. That's my answer for today.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, you're the way you talked about Aurobindo and Teilhard reminded me of what Thomas Berry used to say about Teilhard, that he was the most, in the Western tradition, that he was by far the most significant theologian since the Apostle Paul, because he was the first one to identify the human story with the universe story, that we're an outgrowth of the universe rather than separate from it, and that changes everything. In fact, speaking of this changes everything, I just have to recommend, I don't know if you've seen this yet, it just came out last week, but I'm going to mention it anyway because it's the most significant book I've read in the last decade. Naomi Klein's new book, This Changes Everything. It truly is the best book I've read in a decade, and I just listened to the whole thing, and then now I bought the hardcover because probably 50 times throughout the listening of it, I kept thinking, oh, I got to write that down. I mean, as a preacher, I'm always looking for good material, and there's just so many great quotes and little powerful memes, ways of languaging things. So I just, for anybody, not just to you, but to anybody watching or listening to this, I highly recommend Naomi Klein's book, This Changes Everything.
Yeah,
Well,
a lot of
Craig,
people are talking about it.
yeah.
Thank you.
Any last things that you want to say on this theme, the future is calling us to greatness, or just anything at all? And then how do people go more deeply into your work?
Mm. Well, I think maybe just to take the theme itself just for a second. So this notion that the future's calling us into
Mm-hmm.
greatness. I mean, we've talked about a lot of, maybe you could say most of what we've talked about in some way feeds into that theme. But, I guess in and of itself, what I would just maybe want to highlight about that is that I do think those of us who are, those of us who have the privilege and good fortune to be able to spend our leisure time
Yes.
listening to, engaging, participating in dialogues and series like this one,
Yep.
reading books like the one you just handed,
Yep.
that have the time to be educating ourselves, evolving ourselves, doing spiritual practice, going on retreats, just who really have the privilege to participate
Yep.
in this evolutionary process in the ways we're speaking about. It's not only an opportunity for us, it's a profound obligation that we
Yes.
have. And I think there are many layers to that obligation that are worth pondering. One is what our obligation to all those who came before us, who basically who sweated and toiled to make the world a little bit better for the next generation,
Yes.
and often in bloody warfare, and in horrible disease, and in just very difficult life conditions.
Yeah.
And there's a way we're living this incredibly luxurious, comfortable contemporary lifestyle because of all that's come before, and I
Yep.
feel there's a kind of sacred obligation to the past.
Yes.
I feel similarly, if we look around and realize that those of us who are ever going to participate in anything like what we're doing today
Yep.
are a very tiny percentage of those who are alive today,
Mm.
who are going to have the freedom, the luxury
Mm-hmm.
to think about things, to think about our lives, to reflect, to grow. It's not something most people are ever going to have the opportunity to do who are alive today, right now,
Yes.
because again, for the life conditions for most are not supportive of this. And even those who have, you know, you could say their creature comforts taken care of, but don't have the educational opportunities, or born into traditional cultural structures that are very rigid and old that they'll never break out of. I'm just saying there's
Yeah.
as the ones who have the opportunity to do this, we have an obligation to everybody who never will
Yes.
to help move the whole thing forward,
Hmm.
because any movement forward exerts a positive, it's exerting a positive gravity on the whole system.
Yes. Yes.
And so I feel there's that level. I think, and I think, I'm sure you're talking a lot about this here, but there's an obligation to the future
Yes.
because, as you said, we're at a very pivotal moment here. The emergence of science and technology made so much possible for us to have this incredible world, and it's had some cataclysmic impacts on
Yep.
the biosphere and the system, from species extinction to climate change to burning through all of our fossil fuel resources, et cetera, et cetera. It's,
Hmm.
we've it seems pretty comfortable still right now, but there's a lot we have to turn around, and a lot we have to evolve, and so we don't really, even though we seem to have the luxury to sit around and talk about bigger things, you know I guess I'm saying, we all need to really take it seriously. And I'm not making the point that a lot of people make, which is get off your meditation cushion and get into action. I'm not making that point at all. I'm actually saying, well, I'm including that point, but I'm more saying make the time on your meditation cushion count, because you're evolving consciousness. You're helping evolve human nature. Let's make our own transformational work count. Let's bring it out to the world in all the ways we can. But you know, because so that not just future generations can live, but so that this higher potential of our emergent nature, and
Hmm.
really the utopian possibilities that actually are very real if we could evolve, can come to pass, and we will have contributed to this great project of evolution, and not just stem the tide of carelessness and destruction.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Amen. Wow.
I guess that's my response to your title. In terms of how to get in touch with me and my work, I would encourage you to go to. There's a free audio seminar where I give a deep dive into what my integral enlightenment process is, and what it means to evolve beyond ego, what it means to evolve human nature. It's called The Key to Evolving Beyond Ego. You can go to beyondego.com, I
Hmm.
think is the right one. I actually should know that, but I'm not the best promoter. Let's see. I think beyondego.com gets you there.
Okay.
Oh, no, it doesn't. Sorry, let me say that again. Huh. Uh,
It takes you to a porn site. No.
Yikes. Uh, Let me see. What is it? Um,
Well, if they put just your name and living
yeah,
beyond
well,
ego or
if
something like that.
no, and it's hmm, very interesting. Okay, well, I'm not quite sure what happened to that webpage, but if you go to integralenlightenment.com, you can find it all there, and
Yes.
that's my main website.
Yeah.
So just check out integralenlightenment.com, and
That's great.
yeah, learn more about it. Forward to meeting you in one of my programs, perhaps.
Cool. Yeah. Well, I just want to go on
Okay.
record. I recommend Craig as a spiritual teacher. I recommend him as a fellow evolutionary. And whether you come from an Eastern or Western orientation, I don't think you can go wrong with grounding that spirituality and spiritual practice in a deeply evolutionary understanding of reality, so that we can all work together to ensure that future generations experience reality as the blessing that so many of us have had the chance to experience it as. Well, Craig,
Thank you,
love
Michael.
to you,
I
love to
appreciate it.
Claire. I look forward to seeing you the next time we're out in the Santa Cruz area, and just thank you for being part of this series. I really appreciate it.
Love to Connie as well, and thanks for your great work, and for this series and all the other things you're doing to help move the dial forward.
Mm.
So blessings
You
on
too,
your
brother.
work.
Good,
Thank you.
thanks. Uh-huh. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.